Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, International Trends for EPDs, as part of our series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. It's my great pleasure to have two guest speakers today. Jane is an EPD expert based in the UK, and Steve is the current chair of the Australasian program. Just so that we all know what we're talking about when we talk about EPDs, I'll use this as an example on how to describe what they are. I would think comparing them to a nutrition label is a good way of describing what EPDs do, because they provide factual information for a number of different indicators. So like on a nutrition label where you would have fat, fiber content, sugar, in an EPD you would have carbon footprint, energy use, water use, air pollution, and a number of other indicators, rather than saying this is good and that one isn't so good, because everyone will set their priorities differently. EPDs cover those indicators over the whole life cycle of a product, right from resource use, transport, manufacturing, use phase, through to end of life. And end of life can be either recycling, landfilling, or even reuse. That's all covered in a life cycle assessment study. The difference between an LCA and an EPD is that an EPD is done to a set of rules, product category rules, and that is to ensure all EPDs can be compared, apples by apples. We've got those rules, we do the LCA, and importantly we also do third-party verification, and then it gets registered under an EPD program. That is where they are different to just a self-declaration. It is the using a defined set of rules, having third-party verification, and that registration to ensure it is credible information. The EPD program in Australasia was launched in 2014, and that was by LCAS, the Australian LCA Society, and the Life Cycle Association in New Zealand. Since that launch, we have 41 EPDs registered down here and quite a few in the pipeline. In our registrations for this webinar, we actually did have a question from Katie. Thanks for asking this. And this slide here is in response to your question on how widespread is the availability in Australasia of EPDs for construction products. You can see quite a few different sectors here, and Steve will go into that a bit later as well. That's all from me, and now it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Jane. Jane is a principal consultant with ThinkStep in the UK. Jane has about 20 years of experience with EPDs, and that is originally with DRE in the UK and now with ThinkStep. Jane just last month attended the International Stakeholder Conference for EPDs in London and a meeting of the Eco Platform with businesses, and that was a meeting in Oslo. The Eco Platform is basically a trade association for EPD programs, and their aim is to strive for harmonization, for a consistent approach to verification, and also a consistent interpretation of international standards. Jane will talk more about it, and it's my pleasure to hand over to you now. Thanks very much, Jane, for being here.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be talking to you. And I think the trends that you've been seeing in Australia in terms of the way that your program has grown, that's certainly something that we're also seeing here in Europe in terms of the growth. So I'm going to start by showing you this is actually a graph that I've been collating in terms of the number of construction product EPDs to the core standard that we use in Europe and which you've adopted in Australia as well, Australia and New Zealand from the International EPD Program, which is 15804. And you can see that really the growth in EPD is really taking off. We've now got, this was at the start of 2017, we had nearly 3,600 EPD registered and published globally. And just to sort of talk a little bit about the reasons for the growth, you can see the largest program down at the bottom is EBU in Germany. And really what's been driving the growth here is the need for building LCA that comes through from the building rating system, DGNB, and BNB, which is the government rating scheme that large public projects have to use. And that basically requires a building LCA as a core part, a mandatory part of the assessment. The next biggest program, you can see the orange one, is UL Environment in the United States. And there the driver has actually been LEED and the EPD credits. And basically that program kind of started from nothing, and there's now around sort of 600 EP, just because manufacturers are keen to try and show that their products can get credits and that they have environmental advantages. You've also got the French program, FDES, in France, the grey here, and the growth in this program is largely driven by regulations that requires you to have and publish an EPD within the government program if you want to make any environmental claim about your construction product. And there's a similar regulation just come into force in Belgium. But we're also seeing a growth in programs. So, for example, as I mentioned, there's a Belgian program, EPD Ireland, launched last week, and EPD India a couple of weeks ago. So there's a growing number of programs, not just in Europe. The other big trend that was kind of noted in the meetings is mutual recognition. So this is where if you have an EPD with one program, you're able to make use of a mutual recognition agreement and to actually be able to publish your EPD in another program in another country. And it basically allows you to just do one single EPD and yet then to use a kind of different cover sheet that makes it look like that EPD has the familiarity of a kind of national EPD program. And that's particularly relevant in, for example, Germany, where the kind of layout of those EPDs is quite distinctive and sort of has a national character, if you like. The first programs happened, or the first mutual recognition happened in 2013, and we actually had the first one was between EBU and the international EPD system that you're part of in Australia and New Zealand, and then with UL Environments in the US that had a mutual recognition with EBU, and then EPD Turkey, the kind of part of EPD, the international EPD system. So then they're able to make use of that mutual recognition as well. Then in 2014, EPD Australia joined the international EPD program. EPD Norway had mutual recognition with EBU. 2015, there was a kind of big spate of mutual recognition agreements with BRE in the UK, linking with UL Environment in the US. EPD Denmark with EBU, and Global EPD in Spain, linking with both the main schemes, International EPD and EBU, and EPD Latin America kind of launching. Then in 2016, just one with EPD Norway and in the international program. And then again, there's been another big spate this year in 2017 with EPD Italia, the French system, INEAS, FDES, Eco Passport, which is a French system for building related technical equipment, so heating and ventilation equipment, lighting, electronics for the building, which is linked with EN 1584, and EPD Brazil and EPD India, as I said, have joined the fold. So it's a really great sort of story now. If you're a manufacturer producing, you have an opportunity to be able to use your EPD in a large number of countries. Just a little bit about the EPD program, the international EPD program that you're part of. So there are now 36 countries that have registered EPD in the program. The top 5 are Italy, Spain, Sweden, Turkey, and the UK. And they recorded a record number of visitors to the website in 2016, almost 150,000 visits. And that sort of covered over 31 countries with with more than 1,000 visits. So that it's a really widespread interest in the information that's being provided. And they had a record growth in sort of 2016 with 184 EPD registered, not all of them construction products. And just to show you, as EPD Australia, through the mutual recognition agreements that the international EPD system has, you've basically got access now to a huge number of the markets where your products could be sold kind of globally through these the international EPD system's own kind of international spread, and then through the mutual recognition agreements that are actually in place.
Jane, we've just had a question coming into this slide from one of our listeners in Melbourne, and they have a question. If their company was producing in Germany and, for example, entering the market down here, does it mean they could also just adjust their EPD, an IBU EPD, and probably add transport to make it a valid EPD in Australia?
So if the Australian system has requirements in terms of providing scenarios that are specific to the region, then you would basically provide a kind of an annex to your EPD. So you would change, if you had an existing EBU EPD, you would get a different front sheet. You could basically have a kind of an international EPD front sheet, and then you would have an annex that would just have the transport data and potentially a different end of life if that was part of the requirement of the program. And so that would be what you would register in the international EPD program, and then that would be sort of available in Australia. So yeah.
I think you've almost answered the next question that just came in. If we manufacture in Australia and have an EPD, can we then have that recognized, for example, in Germany, but that would work the same way and we would just do an annex, right?
Yes, yeah. So it works kind of both ways, absolutely. And so I was just going to touch on some of the future things that are happening in Europe and the kind of trends that we've noted from the events that I've been at. So the first one is kind of the use of BIM and machine readable EPD. So I think it's kind of clear that the EPD become the most usable when you can actually use them kind of with building models that are able to automatically calculate the kind of quantities and then link to the EPD data and do that electronically, as opposed to kind of having large spreadsheets and having to try and calculate masses of different materials. So BIM and kind of CAD really make this process much easier. Now, for example, the German LCA or construction kind of LCA database called Alcobadat is available for use in tools. The French LCA construction database Ignes is also available for use in tools. BRE, their database is available as well. So that's kind of the first thing. And there's also actually, as an international standards, the ISO committee, the next work item, construction EPD working group are looking at is on making EPD usable for BIM. So that's sort of taking it just a little step beyond the machine readable to actually have it in a format that works with kind of BIM and IFC language. Linked to that is the kind of move to building LCA. You have something similar in kind of Green Star, where there's a focus on, or there are some credits available for doing an LCA of the building, and we're seeing that more and more now in kind of European building rating systems. So BREEAM 2018 has just launched the consultation. But that's moving much more strongly to crediting the undertaking of a building LCA and benchmarking that and showing that you've made improvements as the main way of getting kind of LCA related credits in BREEAM. And there's also an EU project called Levels, which is a way of measuring the sustainability of buildings that you're constructing. And again, that has a focus on building LCA linked to the European standards. So there is a focus now in actually properly assessing the building over its life cycle, both the materials and the energy that it uses. And we're seeing that kind of coming through. The other thing in building rating systems is more and more of them are providing credits for EPD. Part of me finds it difficult because this is really, it's a tick box for having an EPD. It doesn't really recognise whether the EPD says the product is good or gives you information that allows you to assess whether the product is good or bad. It is literally about having the piece of paper, but it does massively increase the availability of EPD. We've seen that, for example, in the US, where the lead credit has led to so many EPDs being produced, and we hope to see that in kind of green, for example, that will increase the availability of EPD. And once you have that availability, then you have the ability to actually be able to look at the piece of paper and actually see what it's saying and whether the product is good or bad. And it also makes this building LCA much easier because there is the availability of data.
Wouldn't you agree that if a company goes through the whole effort of doing an EPD, that, well, I haven't come across any who just do it to get the piece of paper, but in all the projects we've done so far, they would have identified opportunities to save materials or energy, and by that to also improve their products.
That there is that benefit. I'm not so sure that the project is then a kind of driver for change, but yes, I think that is the case, and certainly we've worked with manufacturers that have used seen from EPD, seen things that they haven't seen in other routes. So, for example, we've worked with a company that was religiously using its environmental management system to track water, and was showing reductions year on year, and was quite pleased with itself. But when it did the EPD, it actually realized that the amount of water it was using per kind of unit of product was really too much, and they actually, as a result of that, found a leak which they wouldn't have found maybe just through a process of just gradually reducing without actually looking at the product level. So there definitely are advantages. And then the final point, kind of business to consumer communication. In Europe, we have some focus on this because of the product environmental footprint work that the European Commission is promoting. So basically, that's a way of providing consumers with information on products, which is the best product from an environmental performance point of view. And so there's work ongoing at the moment in Europe looking at how to kind of provide that type of information. But those are the kind of major trends that came out of the events that we had.
I'm really keen on the business to consumer communication, because we do get quite a few questions around that down here. And in fact, we do have another question that just came in, and that refers back to your machine readable EPDs. Because in the past, EPDs, it seems, were used mainly by LCA experts. Do machine readable EPDs mean that architects can use EPDs in future?
Yeah, that's the intention. So effectively, the EPD almost becomes hidden in the building LCA tool that the architect is using. So assuming that they're working in CAD or BIM, they're able to quickly kind of press a button, and that's possible. We have tools like Tally that link with Revit models and can undertake building LCA, linking the materials to EPD data for different materials, and then it gives you the option to make choices between, effectively, once you've got a material, it then says, well, we have EPD for product specific or alternative kind of products here. Do you want to look and see if you can make an improvement by doing this? it allows you to look at which parts of your building have the greatest impact, and then to explore how you can reduce the building impact.
That, I think, sounds really encouraging, because you basically would not need to be an LCA expert and have real detailed life cycle assessment software, but you could just use it in your CAD or BIM project. I think that has the potential to really make a difference. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I do have one more question, and that goes back to associations. Are most EPDs, or do you see a trend for either more individual manufacturers or for associations undertaking EPD projects in Europe?
So most of the EPDs that are actually being produced now are product-specific, manufacturer-specific EPDs. What we tend to see happening is that perhaps trade associations develop EPD tools, which their members can then use to produce EPD. You might get one generic EPD, but then you'll have quite a lot of the trade association members using the tool to develop EPDs themselves. So the majority of EPDs now are coming from individual manufacturers.
Thank you, Jane. It was really good to hear from about those trends and what we see, or what you see, coming in future. Unfortunately, we do not have time for any more questions, but if you keep sending them through, then we'll get back to you by email and answer all your other questions.
And now it's my pleasure to hand over to Stephen. Stephen Mitchell is a director for the Australasian EPD Program. In fact, he's chair of the board. And Steve is going to tell us about Australasian trends. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Barbara, and thank you, Jane. That was really interesting. And hello, everyone. Barbara's asked a few questions of me, so I'll go through the slides that I've prepared. She was asking me about the uptake of EPD since the launch of the program. So the uptake has been really good since the launch. It's been very strong from the get-go. We've had 14 EPDs registered in 2015, 20 in 2016, and so far in 2017 we've had 7. So in total we've had 41 EPDs by 19 companies that operate in Australia and New Zealand, and we've got a good pipeline of EPDs to be published in the later part of this year and 2018. So that's very pleasing. The drivers of of people taking up Australasian EPDs, as Jane mentioned before, and there's a similar situation here in Australia and New Zealand, the Green Building Council of Australia and New Zealand Green Star programs, as well as the recognition in the Infrastructure Council of Australia's rating schemes, they've definitely raised the profile of EPDs and key drivers for companies providing construction and building footy-out products. Companies are telling us that their customers want to understand their products' choices and their impact on the environment. And the program's transparency, credibility and ability to provide that information across a product's whole life cycle is just the right fit for them. What's also coming through pretty strongly is that Australasian EPD owners, they see the program engaging with respected top-tier companies who have commitments to environmental responsibility and transparency, and they just want to be part of that. That's a strong driver for some companies. And a couple of EPD owners have said to us that the process of an EPD helps them clarify different aspects of production and correct sometimes incorrect assumptions that are being made about their product and hurting their environmental reputations. I know that's the key driver for Australian timber industry and plastic pipe industries to develop their EPDs. And a last driver I think is important to mention from a risk management perspective, the fact that Australasian EPDs are produced to rigorous product category rules and independently verified. That gives a lot of confidence to companies that are having to comply with Australian and New Zealand consumer and fair trading laws. The question was put, are all Australasian EPDs for construction products? Well, you can see there the Australasian EPD owners, the majority are for core building and construction products such as steel, timber, masonry, paint and plastic pipes and concrete pipes as well. We also see EPDs registered for interior fit-out products such as light covers, hot water delivery systems, as well as consumables, paper hand towels and toilet paper, which is great, and that reflects the trend in Europe and other parts of the world as well. We'd like to see a greater variety of products and services getting EPDs, and we think there's great potential there. What an interesting development we see is requirements in government contracts for EPDs. For example, in New South Wales, the government's tender documents for new railway rolling stock, we know that there's a requirement in there, and we know that Downer Group are developing an EPD for their railway cars as a result of this. The international EPD system with which our program is aligned, as Jane and Barbara mentioned, has EPDs for transport equipment, including airplanes, as well as a lot of EPDs produced for food and beverage manufacturing sector. You know, agriculture is such a big environmental impact, so this isn't surprising. So we'd like to see that happen here, and we think there's great potential here for that sector. Where to next for the program? Well, we're pretty excited. As you can see here, to be working with the Australian government on getting companies with Australasian EPDs accepted as meeting the updated national carbon offset standard for products and services. That'll be released soon. The carbon offset standard for buildings was just released last week. The one for products and services will be released very soon. Australasian EPDs include a product's carbon footprint and have to go through independent verification process. So this makes a lot of sense to both us and the Australian government. So that's pretty excited about that. Once this is up and running, we'd like to see this collaboration duplicated in New Zealand. The other area we're excited about is getting out and involved, getting out more and explain the benefits of Australasian EPDs to people such as yourselves, and to help people understand in decision making for sustainable procurement for all sorts of projects and how EPDs can be used in that aspect. And we talked about that towards the end of Jane's presentation. The release earlier this year of that sustainable procurement standard, ISO standard 2400, that sets up a good framework so organisations can be more methodical and quantifiable in their sustainable procurement processes, and we think EPDs are extremely important part of that going forward. How EPDs get used in sustainable decision making in the context of buildings is explained really well in a little video by the German EPD Program, which is why I've included a hyperlink there for people who are interested to look at later on. It's well worth having a squeeze at that. As mentioned earlier, we've got the Australasian program is part of the international EPD system. We've got our own board, Secretariat and Technical Advisory Group, or TAG. That TAG guides interpretation of the product category rules that EPDs have to adhere to, and our TAG ensures that these rules are locally relevant. That TAG also approves local independent verifiers to ensure they have the necessary skill set and experience. The international EPD program has been operating for a long time now, so we get the advantage of using their product category rules that they've developed, as well as tap into advice and interpretation and implementation of it in our program. So there's really good dialogue between the two organisations at operational and technical level, so it's great to be part of that global system of harmonisation that Jane talked about earlier. My next slide is just illustrating our local board of directors. We're not all LCA boffins. We've got we've got people there with a wealth of experience across government, business and the not-for-profit sectors in Australia and New Zealand. So that helps us steer the program in the right direction and apply it to wider audiences. So here's our contact details on my last slide. So if you have any questions, please contact our program manager, Kelly Taylor, or through LinkedIn or Twitter. We've just started up our Twitter account and LinkedIn for the company. With that, thank you very much, everyone, and I'll hand it back to you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was really useful, a really good overview. And we do have a couple of questions for you. One is a company that manufactures in France and want their EPDs recognized down here. And I suggest I'll just put you in touch afterwards so that you can talk in detail in private. And someone else asked if you could please explain the carbon offset program a bit further. And I guess how can EPDs help with it?
Well, the carbon offset standard, that people have to, producers of products or services have to have a life cycle assessment report done on their product covering the life cycle, as does a product wanting an Australasian EPD. So basically all the hard work has been done for those doing an Australasian EPD or those companies doing a carbon offset LCA. So we're sorting out some of the details still, some of the minor details. There's a little bit of tweaking that we've got to do yet, but basically it means that people won't have to reproduce that life cycle assessment, which is the vast bulk of the work, and it'll be a fairly straightforward process to get that carbon footprint in the Australasian EPD recognised by the carbon offset scheme. And then once the carbon footprint's known, they'll have to purchase carbon offsets to get certification as carbon neutral. Anyway, we'll have a bit more information about that in the coming month or two, and how that can be done for businesses that want to take that route. We think it's really a good collaboration.
Thanks very much, Steve. I think it's great to have that just one extra benefit of EPDs in there. Thanks for sharing that with us, and we're looking forward to hear more about it in due course. Thanks again also to Jane. It was really good to get this very recent update from you. With that, have a fantastic afternoon, and I'll see you soon. Thank you. Goodbye.